So last week we spoke about Mussar being the Torah of the self, and how we need to spend some time, energy, use different techniques to improve our character in order that we might better serve our purpose of keeping the Torah. One needs a fine character in order to do that. So at the end of the class, our good friend and colleague over here, Uri Avon, asked, recent in terms of world history, discovery is that one's character and personality is formed in, especially according to Freudian thought, in the early years of life are very influential, if not the most influential, and then kind of the rest of our life we're stuck with that character. So has there been some Mussar acknowledgement of this fact, and maybe trying to think about that from a Mussar perspective? I called my Rebbe, who is Rav Reuven Leichter, who was a student of Rav Volby, who was a student of Rav Yerucham, who was a student of the Alta of Kelm, who was a student of Rav Yisrael Salanta. So I'm only 6 generations in students away from this great Mussar giant. And I asked him Uri's question, and he said 2 things. He said, it's a good question, which is always good to get from him. That's not easy. So that's good, Uri. Well done. That's a good question. Number 2 is that he said he thinks that Mussar is really about developing oneself, that you live more by your seichel, more by your intelligence, your rational thought, than by your desires and whims. If a person, that to him he saw as the main purpose of this movement, that a person would become more aligned and more aware, and strengthen one's seichels, strengthen one's rational thinking, that one could act and be governed in a rational way, and therefore that's not so applicable to children. That starts, he said, according to the Torah, around about bar bat mitzvah age. That's when a person is able to take responsibility for themselves. And he said a lot of the work of the Mussar giants, as we had them in Europe, was with younger men, 18, 20-year-olds. That was the focus. That seems to be when the seichel, I would say, is fully developed. We do find in Jewish thought that at 13 one becomes responsible for oneself, but then at 20 one, the way the Talmud says it, the consequences from heaven, meaning the punishments from heaven, become applicable. So from 13 to 20, there's some leeway. At least God understood teenagers, right? We might, but might not, but God does. And there's some leeway for a teenager. When you get to 20, then that you're expected to take full responsibility for yourself, and even God is going to call you out on your misdoings and reward you for your good doings. So that's what he said. I asked and then he said, well, because of that, he doesn't think that Mussar really focused on younger children because of that, but it doesn't, it doesn't fully answer the question. Why not? Let's put our mind to that endeavor. Rav Volbe did write a book on bringing up children. There is a book on education by him called Binyan V'Zriya B'Chinuch, Building and Planting in education. I haven't read it for a while. I don't have much to say besides the fact that he definitely recognized the organic growth of children and the step-by-step growth of children. I think I have it in English. I could lend that to you, or if you're interested. Okay. I have a good friend who visited on Shabbat, and we were discussing this topic, and he thought that perhaps the answer lay in a beautiful insight that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has a beautiful insight in Parshas Lech Lecha. When God appears to Abraham for the first time, he says to him, Lech Lecha, go, literally go to you, go for you, which is difficult. We don't speak that way in English. So what was he saying? So it's interesting. The verse says, and God appeared to Abraham and he told him, go from your country, go from the place of your birth, go from your father's household to the land that I will show you. So he says, there have been 3 Jews who really put their mind to trying to understand what determines human behavior more than anything else. And he says that they all got it wrong. And this verse is really coming to tell Abraham he's not beholden to any of that. So he says, leave your land. The land is the place of produce. The land is so that he said that was Marx. Karl Marx looked at the world in terms of economics, in terms of distribution of income. Your land, what is produced? Where is that produce? That's what determines who a person is and how they're going to behave. The second one, so that was Abraham, God telling Abraham, leave your land. You're not beholden to that. You can go, you can be Lech Lecha, you can be something else. You can choose something different. You don't need to be stuck in your socio-economic group and the behavior that dictates. There's a beautiful book called The Guardian of Jerusalem, which was written about Yosef Chaim hang on a second, I don't want to say Lutzato because it's not him. Sonnenfeld. Rabbi Sonnenfeld was called the Rav of Jerusalem. He was the unofficial recognized rabbi of Jerusalem. And he lived at the same time as Rabbi Kook. And you could really look at them as the Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel of the time, almost in Israel. They were at odds with each other. Amazingly enough, they respected each other tremendously. Their students didn't. Their students were antagonistic towards each other, but they were extremely respectful to each other. They even did a trip together around Israel to the different kibbutzim and yeshuvim to try and bring people a little closer to to Torah and living in the land according to the laws of the Torah laws of the land. And so why am I telling you this? He was a very nice man. Yes, we know that. So Rabbi.
They were at odds with each other.
Yes, and before that, so in the book, thank you. In the book about Rabbi Sonnenfeld, so he went to the land of Israel probably in the early 1900s. So before the establishment of the state, right? Well, it was still under British mandate, and you know, there were Jewish settlers during that time, and one of the nice things about this book is very well researched, and it has a little paragraph in there from a British colonial general or something, or you know, someone that had been sent to Palestine by the British government, by the Queen, and he writes this amazing thing. He writes this amazing thing home. I don't know who he was writing for, but he says, you know, normally in a slum, you find degradation not only physically but morally, right? People that live in shanty towns, in slums, are prone to are prone to immoral behavior, the necessities of life, the difficulties of life, right? If you grew up and your father's an alcoholic and your mother's a drug trader, or the other way around, it's very hard to break out of that, right? So he says, you know, that's the norm of life, but I've come to Jerusalem and these people are living in a slum. They are so poor. They don't know where their bread will come tomorrow. And yet, I've never experienced such righteous people, right? So we are not subject, we are not beholden to our socioeconomic causality, right? We don't have to behave within our, within that determining factor. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to draw us, right? That's not going to, that it might draw us towards such behavior. We might think of it at the norm, but we are free, right? We are free beings. We can make our own choices. And that means we can break out of that. The second Jewish thinker much earlier was Spinoza. Spinoza thought that the natural world just, everything's determined through the natural world. It's God is within that is God. He was excommunicated for a heretical idea. I mean, he was a great philosopher and he's recognized in the world of philosophy, but he was excommunicated as a Jew, as a heretic. And says Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and I will attach this essay of his to the recording because it's the most beautiful essay. He says, that's what from your father's house, right? If Spinoza knew more about genetics, he would say we are genetically programmed, right? That's the world that's telling us who we are and what we, right? Our genes, right? Your mother was an addict and your grandmother was an addict. Probably you're going to be an addict, right? It's in the genes. So you said, that's what God's telling Abraham. You can leave that as well. Leave your father's house. You're not bound to that behavior either. And then the third one was really Freud, because he says, you know, the place where you were born, that environment, those early years of birth and thereafter, you know, that's what Freud understood is driving us. And he said, leave that as well. Go, Abraham. Lech lecha. You can leave all of that, all of those things which everyone would say are determining you, and you can choose to be someone else. So, you know, that's a beautiful insight. It's a fundamental idea in Judaism, and I think it goes somewhat to addressing the issue Uri brought up, because what we're dealing with Mussar, and again, it's not a full answer, but it seems to be the main focus of Mussar is being that person. Now that I know where I come from, the country I came from, right? I have a friend, a South African friend in San Diego I speak to now and again, and he just went to visit his parents, and I asked him, how was your trip? And he said, oh, it's just so nice to be understood, right? If as a foreigner, you suffer that, right? You're not easily understood, because don't speak a language. That's something that every foreigner needs to accept. It's a reality, right? There's something we need to think. And then there are some locals that reach out with an open heart and try to understand you as much as they can. And they do a pretty good job. Okay. So that's in terms of education. The last thought I had about it was that what could be better to bring up children with good character than parents who are concerned with good character, right? So the Mussar of
So is that considered genetic or environmental?
I would say that's the environmental start you're giving your children, and then later in life they must take it or they might leave it, right? You have it's actually been written about. The Maharal of Prague wrote a whole piece about why the children of rabbis sometimes or often, what we call nowadays, go off the derech, leave the path, right? And he says, well, what's going on here? You would think they grew up seeing that. And he has his answer is that it only works if you're doing it out of love and not out of any other motivation. So he says that the honor, prestige, or the intellectual curiosity of rabbis that might draw them to their intense focus is not enough to pass on to kids. It has to be a passionate love for God, he says, that will be passed on. You could have great people and great intellectuals, and their kids are like, oh, not sure. Okay. Yes, Joy, you need to unmute in order for us to hear your question.
If you're saying that it's a parent's love that helps create a good character, and you're saying a parent who is not showing that love to their child, but showing it more to, in the rabbis, more to their profession, they're not going to produce good, kids with good.
There's not going to be a direct correlation, correct? It's not going to follow so quickly.
It's the amount of attention you give to your children that helps produce that good character. If it's positive reinforcement, as opposed to being negative and criticizing your child.
I like your theory. I agree with your theory. I don't think it's what the Maharal of Prague was saying. He was saying that a parent that is passionate about their profession for the right reason, and in terms of religion, it's the love of God, he said that would be contagious to the children. So the children would pick up on that and want to follow that. They would see the beauty in that. They would resonate with that more than any other motivation, be it for intellectual curiosity or something else.
So so what you're saying, it's the parents' behavior toward their profession that will create the good character in your child versus the attention you give to your child.
Versus the
attention you give.
No, he was not speaking about attention at all. So that's why I say I agree with you, and I imagine he would agree with you. Of course, you need to be attentive and loving and reinforcing to one's child. Whether they will follow, you see, the question of Judaism is, of course, that our children will follow in our footsteps, right? That's what we want. That's not such a modern, right? I never thought of that as being, it's not such a modern idea even, right? You want your children to be themselves and, but no, I want my children to go in the straight way, the way that I'm trying to forge. They should just be better. Okay, let's get on to today's topic. So we said we're going to get into, Mussar itself. So I called this the Torah of the self, number 1. Last week was the introduction, and I will share the source sheet with you. It's on the Safari app with the notes. Okay. Comes along Moses, and Moses says to the people, V'ata Yisrael, and now, O Israel, Ma Hashem Elokecha shoel meimach. What does God demand of you? What is shoel, is asked? What is God asking of you? Ki im liyira, only that you should, only this, to fear, right? Ki im liyira es Hashem Elokecha, to fear the Lord your God. That's what God, right? Now, I'm going to use the word Yira because it doesn't always have to translate as fear, although normally it is, and most simply translated as fear. But that's going to be the focus of our class today. This word, Yira. Ki im liyira Hashem Elokecha. And then the verse continues. Lelechet b'chol drachav, to go, to walk in his paths. Ola ahava oto, to love God. Ola avod es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levav b'chol nafshecha, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. And the next verse continues, and to keep his mitzvot, and to serve him in purity. So the Talmud comes along and says something interesting. The Talmud comes along and says, is it in this sheet? Let me see. Should be. No, I don't think it made it here. Okay. The Talmud comes along in many places and says, Hakol b'dei shemayim chutz mi'yira shemayim. Everything is in the hand of heavens except for the fear of heaven. So actually, and it brings a proof from this verse. You see that what did Moses say? What does God want from you? Sorry, what does God want from you? Only that you should fear him. Now, let's just textually think about what's going on over here. Moses actually has a long list of things, right? You should fear him. Wait, keep on doing that. You should fear him, and you should go in his ways, etc., and love him. So what are these other things? How could the Talmud say that the only thing God wants from you is that you should fear him? So it must be that the Talmud is saying that, there are no punctuation marks in a Sefer Torah. The Torah is written without punctuation or vowels, which gives us a little bit of room actually for interpretation. So it's saying there's a colon. You need to put a colon over here, meaning, and now Israel, what does the Lord your God demand of you? Only this, to fear the Lord your God. And what does that mean? Or what will that lead to? That means and leads to walking in his path, loving him. The rest will follow. But the thing you need to be concerned about is Yira. That is the thing you need to be concerned about. Okay, and comes along the Talmud. Only the Talmud could say it this way, and says, Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa interpreted the following verse. The angel that is appointed over conception is called Layla. Right? So Layla is a woman's name, right? That's the angel of conception. And the angel takes the drop from which a person be formed and presents it before the Holy One, blessed be he, and says before him, right, Master of the universe, what will be of this drop? Will this person be mighty or weak? Will they be clever or stupid? Will they be even wealthy or poor? And the Gemara notes, but this angel does not say, will he be wicked or righteous? This is in accordance with the statement of Rav Chanina. Oh, here it is. This was what I was looking for. As Rav Chanina said, everything is in the hand of heaven except for the fear of heaven. As it says, and now Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you other than to fear? So the first and the prime, what we're going to call midah, character trait, is that a person should be capable of and develop his yira, to develop this. Let's see what it is. So just before we see what it is, sorry, here we have Rav Yisrael Salanta again, who comes along and he says, you know, I've looked at the world, he says, and I see that people are busy and people are thinking all the time. He says, look at a businessman. Just take a businessman and think about how he looks for deals and how he scrutinizes the deals and how he rethinks the deal and how he tries to look at it from all different directions to improve it and to make sure it's the best deal for him. And he says, Lo chen b'darchei Mussar. But he says, unfortunately, this is not true for the ways of character development. Which, by the way, right, he says, for it requires contemplation of all the deeds of man. You got to think about everything. To guard from the leanings of our desires. We're driven by our desires. From the Yetzer, our evil inclination that disturbs and prevents every good and elevated thing. And he says, needed for the attainment of Yira, right? So, lahasagat hayira, that we should, in fact, attain a level, or this character trait, this ability to fear. And he says, and what people don't think about it. It's not even a conversation, right? You sit down with your friends and what do you talk about? Talk about sports, you talk about politics, you talk about whatever's going on. And the last thing you talk about is, how do you acquire fear of heaven, right? We don't talk about that. So, he was lamenting that. But you see from this that the point that he wanted to get to was Yira, fear. Okay.
Rabbi, is it more awe than fear? Fear is very, very misleading.
There we go. The three types of fear of heaven. Okay, there are three types. So it comes along. Rav, we're going to have a picture of him later. This is an artistic rendition of what he might have looked like. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, what do you notice strange about a rabbi? No beard and long hair. That's the way I like them. Okay, so he felt that growing a beard was presumptuous. Who are you to grow a beard and look holy? Uri, it wasn't in our age, okay? It was back then. But he said, who are you? Probably the greatest Jewish mind and holiest soul of the time, and he shaved, right? Or he used dilapidatory cream. I don't know how he shaved exactly, but okay. So comes along Luzzatto, and he says, well, when we analyze it, there are three parts, okay? We must first introduce that there are two, keep on doing that. There are two types of fear. Let's use the pen. There are two types of fear, which are effectively three. The first type is very easy to attain, there being nothing easier. The second is difficult, while the second part of the second, so you got 1, 2, and 2B, right? 1, 2A, and 2B, is more difficult than everything. Its perfection is likewise the great form of perfection. The first type is fear of punishment, and the second is fear of God's exaltedness. what we call Yirat Haromamut, which means the fear of God's exaltedness, a fear of God's being almighty, of which fear of sin is the second part therein. And now we'll explain these matters and their differences. So it's important that when we speak about this concept, we are clear about which one we are talking about. So yes, Abraham, you're right. All, right, we psychologically have been trained not to enjoy uncomfortable feelings. And we try our best to avoid them as much as we can. Being scared of something, right? Being in fear is uncomfortable. We don't like it, and therefore we don't even like to talk about it. Being in awe is an exhilarating feeling. So we like to talk about that. But the truth is that they both exist, and they both exist within Judaism. Now, before we get there, before we get to talking about what these sections are, why is it called, and it goes back to the Talmud, goes back to the Talmud. The Talmud calls it, right, Yirat Shemayim, which means the fear of Shemayim is heaven. Why do we call it heaven? Why? We know God. We can speak about the fear of God, and the verses speak about all the time, right? Yiras Hashem Elokecha, right? You're going to fear the God. It doesn't say fear of heaven. If anything, it's a little incongruent with Judaism, right? We don't think about relating to anything else really besides God. So why do we call it in Hebrew Yirat Shemayim, or in Ashkenazi pronunciation Yiras Shemayim, right? The person, are they if you're in the world that I dabble in, so when you dabble in shidduchim and people are looking for references and you're trying to find out about people, inevitably people say they are a Yarei Shemayim, right? They fear Shemayim. They're a God-fearing person. That's what you want to hear. And then you have to wait for about half an hour till you get to some truth. Okay, but Yira Shemayim, why do we call it that? It's a strange thing, really. So this is Nitzan Bergman's theories. Number one, why is it called Yirat Shemayim, fear of heaven, and not fear of God? Number one is reverence, right? We don't like to use God's name without need, right? We're careful. We studied that when we talked about tefillah, prayer. We refer to God as Hashem all the time, right? The name, because we don't want to evoke His name, lest we say it for the wrong reason or unnecessarily or in a disparaging tone or way. So I think it's got to do with that. Where is God? Right? Avinu shebashamayim. Right? Uri, if you want to entertain us with some nice thing. No, okay. Right? He is our Father in heaven. So we speak about the fear of heaven because we're talking about where God is. An idea I heard from a friend of mine who was a student of Moshe Shapiro said, Shemayim is actually, if you look at it grammatically, it's many sham, right? Shemayim, susim, right? You have a noun, and then the im at the end is just the plural. So it's many sham. Sham in Hebrew means there. Sham, shama. So when we speak about Shemayim, we're talking about all the theirs. What's there? The consequence of what happens is there. Everything we do is considered in Shemayim. And from there, it comes back to us. So Shemayim is the place of consequence. And as we talk about what the fear of heaven, these levels, we will come back to this because it's a very useful idea. Rav Chaim of Volozhin obviously lived in a place with a tower with a bell, and he said, that's the idea of the bell at the tower, right? The guy on the bottom, of course, we're familiar with this from a church example, but the guy on the bottom pulls the rope, and that moves the bell on high, and the bell then rings and is heard back down here. So he says that's what's happening when we're doing our mitzvot, right? Why did the Rebbe think? Why did the Lubavitcher Rebbe think that if he sent his soldiers out and just to know one more Jew would put on tefillin, the Mashiach would come, Messiah would come? How's that going to happen? Well, he said, because you don't know the consequence of what's happening when you do a mitzvah. Right? When you do a mitzvah, you're creating tremendous energy above there in Shemayim that then filters back down into this world. So that's why we call it Yira Shemayim. Okay.
I have a problem with yes, I know. Thank you. With where you place the colon in the initial explanation of the phrase after Yira. To me, it implies that unless you first have fear, you first have Yira, you can't move on. In other words, you can't work your way towards Yira through good deeds and behavior. You have to first have Yira as a precondition for developing the other attributes of Mussar. And I have a problem with that conceptually. Surely the Torah, in the words of Micha, would also say that God needs the right behavior, not necessarily the right attitude. So what does the law of God require of you? Surmera, avoid evil, love good, and walk humbly with your God. That formulation says nothing about your mental attitude other than walk humbly, which is not necessarily the same as Yira, I think. You with me?
I am. So I'm going to keep your question for the end of this class.
Okay.
And when is the end of this class? I'm so sorry, but I just assumed it was half hours again, but it's not. Is it?
Yeah, no, sorry, I did not. Did I write that even?
No, but I just assumed from our last class. So how long are these classes now?
I would like to make them an hour if possible. And I understand if you didn't know that for today, and we can end here and we can pick up here next week.
I have a 2:15, but I certainly don't want to mess it up for everybody else.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is then don't know what I'm gonna do. Yeah, I'm not going to go too far, or if I do, Linda, I will fill you in.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so Abraham, let's look at what is this Yirat Onesh? What is this fear of punishment? So says this is Lutzatum, Meseles Yesharim, the path of the just. The fear of punishment is as its name implies. For a person to fear transgressing the word of the Lord his God due to the punishments incurred for the transgression, whether to body or soul. And I would add, either in this world or the next world. This type of fear is certainly easy to attain, for every man loves himself and fears his soul. And there is nothing which keeps a person from doing something more than fear, and this thing might bring harm, this thing might bring harm to him. So we are human nature. We love ourselves, right? We care for ourselves. We want the best for ourselves. So we stay away from things which will be detrimental, which will be painful, which will be bad for us. And we are drawn to that which is good for us. So normally, actually, in the discussion of Yirat Onesh is actually what's called Onesh goes with Sachar v'Onesh. Sachar is reward. So you're living within your relationship to God is predicated on understanding that there is reward and punishment for listening or transgressing his word. Okay, and comes along the Rambam, Maimonides. I'm just gonna I want to get to what sorry, my ordering wasn't exactly the way I wanted it. So it comes along Maimonides. There it is. Can you believe that the Spaniards actually made a stamp with obviously an artistic rendition of him, of great rabbis from Spain that they then subsequently killed. Okay, very nice. Comes along the Rambam, Maimonides, and he says like this: Let no man say, behold, I perform the precepts of the Torah and engage myself in its wisdom so that I will receive all the blessings, or so that I will merit the life in the world to come. That's the reward. And I will separate myself from transgressions against the Torah gave, warning, so that I will escape the curses described, the punishment, and I will not suffer. I will suffer excision in the life and the world to come. It is improper, says Maimonides, improper to serve the Lord in such a way. For whoever serves the Lord in such a way, he is a worshipper because of fear, which is neither the degree of the prophets nor the degree of the sages. It's low level relationship with God. And the Lord should not be worshipped that way, save only by ignorant men and infants who are trained to worship because of fear, until their knowledge increases, when they will worship because of love. So comes along Maimonides, and he is very outspoken. He knows this idea exists. He's aware of it. And he says, but it's low-level Judaism. It's low-level Judaism to think in this term. And one must come to the what he calls love. And I would venture to say that when someone reaches the higher level of Yira, what we call Yirat Aromamot, the awe of God is very much connected to one's sense of love for God, right? Whereas fear of punishment is not so, at the end of the day, you're more concerned about yourself. You're not really interacting that much with God. Now, having said that, came along Rav Yisrael Salanta in his O Yisrael, this pioneer of Mussar, and he says, without much insight or thinking, it's very simple. We recognize the faith within us, that God judges each person. Sorry, my Hyde Park High School English. God judges each person to give to each person according to his deeds. This is the first step to serving God. So this was a very kind of novel thing for him to say. And his whole book is really focused at this level. And he called this the, Reishet Mitza'adenu La'avodato Yitbarach. Right? This is the first step in serving God, is to know that there's real, or to accept, or to engage with that belief within us that there is real consequence to our actions, right? And God is the decider. God is the judge who decides what the consequences are, and he's given us the rules by which he's going to judge what the consequences are. That was an interesting direction that he took. Many people, including my Rebbe, are not sure that that is so true for us today, right? Are we able to relate to God? Are we able to relate to God in this, right? One needs to have a lot of belief. One needs to be very strong in one's belief that there is absolute and thorough judgment about what happens to a person. Now,
Rabbi,
yes.
how does this then relate to Yom Kippur? If that's the day of judgment and the days of awe are from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, how is this all connected?
Well, that says Rav Yisrael Salanta, this rabbi, is the day, right, when we all focus on this for an entire day, not for 10 minutes. But that's, that's, if you look at the prayer book on Yom Kippur, that's really what it says, right? Who by fire, and who by water, and who by ice, and who by strangulation, and who will be at peace, and who will wonder, and who will be enriched, and who will be impoverished. And that's the day of, that's the whole focus of Yom Kippur.
Right, and I find that liturgy very powerful, and very complete in some ways, if I'm making sense. My education is very weak, so I'm sorry if I'm...
No, it is. If you can truly believe that, said Rav Yisrael Salanta, that will take you far. You'll be a good person because you'll be scared stiff to step out of line, right? You don't want bad things happening to you. So that's religion out of fear, right? That's the
Correct. But then you're saying that you need to love God. That's what your first step is. You're looking at your deeds, or God looks at your deeds and what you're thinking, and then you act on it. And then when you come for the days of awe and Yom Kippur, you're evaluating your life along with God judging it.
That's the basic bottom line level of Judaism, right? That's what he's saying. Now, what I showed you before, the Rambam Maimonides, he felt that
it says you fear God out of ignorance, and only for love of God do you act in a more positive, you look at it positively. At least that's how I'm interpreting it.
to recognize how great God is, and it means that it distances and refrains from sin because of God's great honor. Blessed be his name, right? How could his flesh of blood, how could his heart of flesh and blood, lowly and petty, allow or do anything against the will of his creator? Blessed and exalted be his name, right? So if you just take a simple parable, right? If you were trying to learn something from a master, right? If you wanted to learn violin, and Yitzchak Perlman was your master teacher. So you would be in awe of this man who has complete mastery over the instrument, and when he's teaching you things, you would not go on your own way. It would be stupid. How could you? Well, you know nothing compared to him. How could you go on your own way? How could you do something that is not aligned to what he is teaching you? And that is the higher level. That is a higher level of which I think develops quickly into love, because once you realize how perfect, great, almighty, exalted God is, and you're following in his ways, you develop a sense of privilege, right? Wow, you'd be sitting there learning violin from Yitzchak Perlman, so then you'll be, halfway through, you'll pinch yourself and you'll say, is this really happening to me? Have I merited to learn from the world's great?
Is it love or respect at that
Sorry?
point? Is it love or respect?
I think they're two sides of the same coin. I think we're in our love for God, love for people, we often use as a synonym for care. We love our children, and in a sense we don't. Yes, we respect them, but we don't look up to them, right? We don't look up to them. But the respect we have, the reverence is maybe a better word, right? The reverence we have for God in understanding his greatness is what then I think is the other side of the coin of love, right? Once we realize, it's almost, wow, I can't take a move wrong. I must be aligned. I must follow God. That's one sense, and then immediately we think, wow, God is. I'm so privileged to be able to do this, to have this relationship, to be able to the degree I can, know God and follow in his ways. So that's the higher level, and then just he says a subdivision of this is called Yirat Chet. The fear of sin, he says, is that you then become very conscious and very sensitive to not wanting to do anything wrong, right? You don't want to put a foot out of step. You don't out of line, right? You, in the presence of someone great, you're careful with yourself, right? You're careful, and again, I think it's almost this, from a psychological point of view, with the focus. Am I focused on my own behavior in the presence of God? That's Yirat Chet. That's the fear of sin. Am I focused on my awe of God? That sense of awe. That's what's called Yirat Haromamut. That my fear of God's exaltedness. And again, the lower level was that I'm focused on what God is going to do to me as a consequence. Now, going back to that, by the way, I think there's still room when we speak about Yira Shamayim. We spoke about the consequence of what is going to happen, and I think even within Yirat Romamut, the second level of fear, the higher level of fear, the awe, there is a there is a sense to this Yirat Shamayim in that I should be aware of the consequence which I cause to not only myself, but to the entire world. So that also is a type of, that is a type of fear. I'm careful, I'm sensitive, because I'm not, right? What we know from the Torah and our faith is that we are not only affecting ourselves. In fact, we affect the entire world. With such a mindset, one is fearful of doing the wrong thing and sure to do the right thing. Okay, I wanted to spend just the last bit of the shiur. We maybe are running out of time here, but this was Rav Eliyahu Dessler. Rabbi Dessler was a great Mussar giant. He landed up his last years in Ponevezh in Bnei Brak as the Mashgiach. He was born in 1892 in Libor, Lithuania, and I don't know exactly when he passed away. But says Rabbi Dessler, he came from the school of thought of Kelm. There was a yeshiva in Kelm led by the Alta of Kelm initially, and then later on by different students of his, which was a great Mussar yeshiva. Some say even in this yeshiva, Mussar was the prime study, more than Talmud. Right? You went to Kelm to really get into your to really get into Mussar. And the method of Mussar, what they understood was that if you would contemplate, if a person would sit and use this mind of ours to think and to think deeply about these matters, it would enter the heart. It would create some change in one's character and personality. So, he has a beautiful meditation on the very first words of the Mesillat Yesharim that says, the foundation of piety and the root of perfect service is for man to clarify and come to realize the truth of his obligation in his world and what he needs to direct his gaze and his aspiration in all he toils all the days of his life. And comes along Rav Dessler and says, well, what is this? What is this obligation that we need to fulfill and to reach? And he brings a verse from Eov, from Job. He said to man, see, fear of the Lord is wisdom. Hein Yirat Adonai hi chachma. Or Yirat Hashem, as we call, right? This is often quoted as Yirat Hashem hi chachma. The fear of the Lord is wisdom. And that is the true obligation to which we should come to. So I'm going to start and maybe even devote the next class to how he thinks about that. What thoughts can one have? How does one deliberate? How does one contemplate? What does one contemplate in order to build that? Okay, I'd like to, because I said I would, come back to Uri's question. And that is, everything that's said here is premised on this reading of the verse, that it starts with a sense of Yira, of fear, of awe, and then these other things can develop. Uri, are you more or less troubled now that we've got to the end of this class?
I remain troubled.
You remain troubled. Okay. Does anyone want to maybe take a stab at how you would answer Uri's question?
Say the question again.
I was concerned that developing fear or awe of God seems to be the gateway to proper behavior. Without that, you can't walk in his paths, love him, or serve him with all your heart and soul. In other words, doing good deeds has to be predicated on a fear or awe of God, which to me seems to be problematic. It puts up a hurdle to moral behavior. If you're first required to fear or have an awe of God, it's putting the horse before the cart or whatever. Cart before the horse. That sequence.
This is why I have problems with fear, because exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, but if you turn it to awe or even joy, which to me is a very high level, then it kind of opens the door to.
I agree, but can't practicing good deeds lead to that joy? Why is it a precondition?
I think it's out of the respect, rather than the fear, the respect. Therefore, I respect it and I will obey it for its, because of the level of respect that I have towards it, which then leads to a higher level of joy. You're right. I mean, you're starting off with on one foot. If you say fear, you're just hopping around on one foot. But if you say respect, then I think it's more acceptable into your line of argument. And it goes on further. I think that the rabbi was saying about, you know,
I also
the violin player, you know, that if you greatly respect him, therefore you pay attention to him because you realize the value. I think that's the wonder, the wonder of being Jewish, is that we are in that automatically in that level of respect by keeping all the mitzvahs and everything. With other faiths that are scrambling around, you know, we start off with that great respect for the Torah. I remember once when I was first getting, I might just share something with you. I was first getting going to an Orthodox shul. I completely didn't know anything about Judaism at all, and we had the stone Torah, and I was sitting next to someone, and I put it down flat because that's the way the book. And I saw very carefully this man very, very carefully move his hand over and then prop it up on the side. And I said, wow, what respect for a book this man had. And that really was one of just a simple action was one of the things that opened the door to me to find out what that respect was.
Joy, what were you going to say?
I also think when you start talking about fear and you put fear before positive, you're teaching negative. And when you're talking about a love of God or to do good things, you want to do good so good happens. When you start putting in fear and punishment, it becomes a very negative way of looking at life, looking at our behavior. You know, you want to do things because it's the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do. And fear is negative. And yes, at some point you have consequences. If I go this way, this will happen. If I go this way, this will happen. And sometimes you only do the good thing because you don't want the bad thing to happen. But it's a choice. Somehow fear to me is negative, and teaching fear before teaching good, it won't won't produce the results you want.
Okay.
I might be just coming from a different perspective. I go back to looking at my kids. If they're doing something, I don't know, they're squashing an ant and you're trying to teach, you just don't kill an ant because it is a living thing. If you teach that, negative, you don't kill an ant, as opposed to saying, that's a living thing. How do you think it feels when you put your foot on it? And that it does have feeling, so that in the future, when they see a living thing, whether it's an ant or a cat or whatever, or a person, they'll think of doing the positive instead of the negative. When the positive doesn't work and you've given all, then there's also the consequence. It's like how you're teaching all the time. That's how I look, in some ways, our relationship to God. God made this magnificent world. He made a magnificent book and a magnificent way to live. But if you're always saying bad, 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 or no, 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 you gotta fear, how are you gonna learn to love? How are you gonna learn to do good versus basically being paralyzed because you can't do anything good?
Well, a few things on that is, number one, it's interesting, having lived now through a pandemic for just over a year, different people have had very different responses to it. Most people I know were very fearful of catching the virus, right? I myself would not go to shul because I don't want to catch the virus. I'm scared of it. I don't want to get sick. I could get very sick. I don't want to get my wife sick. I think if we are honest, I think we do live with a lot of fear from bad things, right? The Torah offers, the way that the 613 mitzvot are divided, there are 365 prohibitions and 248 what we call obligations, positive obligations, right? Do things. So the Torah is not a book about, don't do this, don't do that. The Torah is a book about, this is good for you and that is bad for you. Stay away. When we think about even, and I think it's even at this lower level, when we think about punishment, it, as I said in the class, it's in the context of consequence, right? There are consequences to your actions. You are held accountable. Now, I think, I'm going to try answer Uri's question with this, is that Rabbi Dessler has a very interesting piece where he speaks about, how can you, spiritually speaking, a person that grows up in a house with a father and a mother who are very righteous and beautiful people, and they give the child the best education, and there's warmth, and this child kind of goes in their way. And the child's a good child. He's a good person. But he never really works on himself. He never pushes himself beyond his comfort zone, right? He follows the track, and he's okay. He's a good person. We would all call him a good person, but not, he's not pushing himself. Whereas someone that grows up with, terrible, abusive, addictive parents, and they do a little to become better, right? They're not going to be, so objectively, if you look at, person A and person B, you'd say person A is a much better person for our world. They're living on a higher level. But person B has done more work on himself. He's pulled himself up by his socks. He's done the work of Yirat Shamayim. He's entered into, he's taken responsibility for himself. So says Rav Dessler, you know, even though we would say person A is much better than person B, he says in Shemayim, right? Where it's all reckoned, person B is better. He's done more, right? He worked more on himself. So I'm going to, and I need to think about this, whether it plays out as true in our life. But when someone really engages with God and Torah, right? The Torah as being the will of God, is that when they engage with that in a way that's going to take them personally further than who they are, they're going to develop. Does that not necessitate either this idea of consequence, right? I take responsibility for my actions because I realize there are consequences. That to me is the first step. Would you do more? Would you be prepared to go further if there's no sense of consequence? That is what I would like to argue as the rationale behind this idea that this is the gateway Mida, right? This is the gateway movement. Okay, let's agree to think more on this subject. Thank you, Uri, for once again deepening our thought. And we look forward to seeing everyone, please God, next Monday.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
Thank you.
Bye.